The new version of Dungeons & Dragons is here. D&D 2024, D&D 5.5, 5.24, 5.24, whatever you want to call it, the new version of Dungeons & Dragons is here, and I am going to give you my thoughts and opinions on this new edition of the game. And I know there's a lot of bias and anger towards Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, and this is not a place where I'm going to discuss those things. My job here is to give you as fair of a review as I can of the book and the game rules and whether or not this is going to be a game for you. So the way I'm going to do this is break it down into the yay column and the nay column. A list of things I like about this book and this version of the game, and the things I don't like about this book and this version of the game. So let's dive in. So the first thing I like about this book is it's new player friendly. It starts in chapter 1 telling you how to play the game. The rules are all contained in chapter 1 of this book. Back in 2014, I used to tell people, don't start in chapter 1, start in chapter 7. Read chapter 7 through chapter 10 because that's the actual rules of the game. That's what I used to say for the 2014 version of the game. Now, players can just start in chapter 1 and read chapter 1, and it's only about 30 pages. Where in 2014, if you were to read from chapter 7 to chapter 10, you were reading over 70 pages. All the rules you need to play can be found in chapter 1, with the caveat that you need to skip to chapter 10 to read the rules about magic. So that increases the page count a little bit, but you're still reading less than half the number of pages that you had to read in 2014 in order to understand the rules of the game itself. That is an improvement. The other thing that makes this book new player friendly is the examples of play. There's parallel columns that show you how the game is played as they break down conversations between game master and players, and then there's little text boxes beside that that show you what a skill check is, what an attack roll is, and they break these examples of play down into the 3 categories of social, exploration, and combat. This is a definite improvement over the previous book. So this brings me to the first thing on the nay list, the first criticism, and that is the layout and design. Now, I recognize that this book is a big improvement when it comes to layout and design when compared to previous editions. However, it still does not set the standard for the industry. Games like Old School Essentials and companies like Free League are doing a much better job in this category, and their books and their layout is far superior to what Wizards of the Coast is doing here. Now, I say that as a criticism to be honest and fair in this review, but as a whole, like I said, this is a step in the right direction for Wizards of the Coast. This book looks better and is better organized than I think just about any other previous edition that was published by both Wizards of the Coast and TSR. So it is a stride, a big step in the right direction. It's just not to the level that I would want to see out of the biggest company in this industry. So the next thing that I really like, the next thing on our yay list, and that is the rules glossary. This is a great tool. It's an easy way to look things up, and it's very well designed, especially if you're using the digital version on D&D Beyond, because everything is hyperlinked so that you can go through the digital glossary, read anything. If you have further questions, you can click and go to that section of the book to access more details on those rules. The rules glossary is a much needed improvement and is a very useful tool, and I really like it. And while we're talking about the rules, let's talk about how concise and well written these rules are. Again, this is a big step in the right direction for Wizards of the Coast, and these rules are more concisely written and more efficiently laid out than previous editions. However, you can tell in their attempt to make things more concise and easier to read, they included some mistakes and some contradictions. So while trying to be concise, they left out some rules clarifications. And that's the next thing on the nay list, is that the wording, while concise, is not perfect. It's not ideal, and that creates some problems. Now, by the time this video comes out, most of those corrections will be updated in the digital version on D&D Beyond. So that's a good thing that they're able to update D&D Beyond so quickly. However, that means your hardcover book, in fact, my hardcover book hasn't even arrived in the mail yet, and by the time I get it, it's not going to be consistent with the D&D Beyond version. Now, that's because they've already fixed the D&D Beyond version, And that is a good thing that we have a ready-made errata. We don't have to wait for officially published errata down the line the way we've had to with previous editions. So it's good that they're able to update D&D Beyond so quickly. It's just kind of disappointing that my physical book is not going to have the right and correct rules in it. So the next thing we have on the yay list, the next thing that I really like about this new edition is the class balance. You can tell that they put most of their effort, in fact, we know they put most of their effort here, because that's what the playtest documents, the Unearthed Arcana documents, were all about, and that is the class balance. They really worked hard to get all the classes to play at a similar power level, but yet still feel distinctly different. This is probably the most accomplished part of this edition. In fact, it's the largest improvement over every other edition of Dungeons & Dragons, is that each of these classes is going to play at a similar power level, and there's not going to be glaring differences like there were in previous editions. Monk, 5th edition Monk, I'm looking at you. 3rd edition Ranger, looking at you. There were glaring differences in previous editions between some of the classes and others. But this one works really hard to get that class balance very well designed. So we're still going to see some differences. For example, the Wizard and the Sorcerer are now probably going to be the most powerful classes, with the Rogue and the Ranger being the least powerful classes. But the space between those classes is pretty small, pretty thin. There's not a significant power gap between the most powerful classes and the least powerful classes. Unlike in 2014, where we had the Evocation Wizard all the way up here at the top of the chart, and the Way of the Four Elements Monk all the way down here at the bottom of the scale. So that is a drastic improvement over the 2014 version. The class balance is significantly better. But then that brings us to my next criticism, the next thing on the nay list. And I'm not sure if this is going to stay on the nay list for me. I have to play the game and really get into it to know if I like this. But at first take, well, really at this point I think it's like 3rd or 4th take, because I saw this all the way through the playtest, and that's weapon mastery. I have not liked the design of weapon mastery all the way through the playtest, and I don't like that it made it into the game. But that opinion might change once we actually play it at the table. So the weapon mastery is a new feature of the game that allows your martial classes to do unique things with their weapons. So this is what helps the martial classes be on the same power level to put out the same amount of damage as your spellcasting classes. So from that design, I like the intention, because this is obviously part of the reason why the classes are more balanced now, because the martial classes can do much better damage. However, I'm afraid the weapon mastery design is going to slow down the game, as your martial classes have extra steps on every turn, because they're using these weapon mastery properties. So for now, at least, weapon mastery is on my nay list. The next thing I really like about this is the action design. There is now a specific list of actions you can take, and they're all on one table, so they're easy to see and understand. These actions correlate to a skill. So using a skill is now connected to a specific action. Now there is an exception to this, and that's what makes it onto the nay list, is there's not a specific action related to sleight of hand, athletics, or acrobatics. So that leads me to assume that those 3 skills can be used as part of your movement and are not considered actions, because all the other skills have a direct action attached to them. So I would like to know the clarification on that. And really all it would take is, less than a paragraph, really a couple of sentences, to explain what I just said, that those 3 skills can be used as part of your movement. So I don't know why that's not in there. So that's what makes it on the nay list. I like the action design. I just hate that they left off those 3 skills and didn't clarify as to whether or not using those skills are part of your action or are they part of your movement. So the next thing on the yay list is they've done away with opposed checks. You no longer roll off against each other to determine a result. The player now just rolls the dice against a set DC difficulty check, or the Game Master, Dungeon Master, makes a single roll as a saving throw. So let's take grappling, for example. It used to be the player would roll a dice and add their strength, the monster would roll a dice and add their strength, and you would compare the scores. That was the opposed strength check. which added a certain level of swinginess because the player could roll high, the monster could roll low, and you would have a dramatically different result, where, say, a rogue with a 10 strength would be able to grapple a dragon with a 20 strength simply because the rogue rolled a 14 and the dragon rolled a 1. Now, it's just a set saving throw. So if the player wants to initiate a grapple, if that rogue wants to grab the dragon's tail, the dragon just makes a saving throw, so it's just one dice roll, which reduces the swingy nature of the game. You're no longer comparing two different rolls to each other. The dragon just makes one roll and adds their strength bonus, so it's far more likely to succeed when the rogue only has a 10 strength. I really like that design, and I'm just using grappling as one example. Imagine in social checks, where your bard rolls a 10, but they have such a high bonus that your roll of a 14 is negated, and that bard just sweet talks his way past whatever they want. Now you can set the difficulty check as you see fit as a game master as to how realistic it would be to talk the dragon out of their treasure hoard. I know that's a silly example, and any good game master has multiple ways of avoiding that situation. Overall, I think this is better game design because it reduces the number of ways that D20 checks can be resolved. Since you no longer have the opposed check, you're always rolling against a set number. So it's either you making a difficulty check or your opponent making a saving throw. But in both cases, they are making a roll against a static number. You're no longer doing this you roll, I roll, let's see who gets higher kind of competition test. I personally like that, and I see that as an improvement to streamlining the efficiency of the D20. So now you have the top 5 things that I really like about this version of the game, and you have 4 things that I see as criticisms. So overall, I like this version of D&D, and I'm going to play it, and I'm going to do another video of how I'm going to implement this and introduce the new rules to my players. So stay tuned for that. Go ahead and like and subscribe, because that's the cool thing to do if you appreciate the content so far. And as always, thanks again for watching the Dire Den, and I'll see you next time.